two. Lisa, do you want to do a roll call?
Sure. Mr. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Cleveland is out. Mr. Kowski?
Here.
Mr. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Guerrero?
I'm
Ms.
here.
Guerrero, I'm so sorry.
No problem. I'm here.
Mr. Henry?
Here.
Dr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Kohler?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Sador?
Here.
We also have Mr. Imhoff
Here.
and Ms. Cole.
Here.
All right.
Thank you. So the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our first two meetings of January 18th and February 3rd. Thank you, Lisa, for giving us such thorough minutes. It's pretty easy to see what we had talked about. I guess just a point of clarification or question for me. I think the purpose of us reviewing them and giving you any feedback is more the substance of the conversation rather than trying to correct every single little word. I saw a couple typos and things here and there, but I don't think that we're concerned about that. But did anybody have any concerns regarding the subject matter of the minutes from either meeting that they wanted to raise before we vote and accept them? I guess let's start with the January 18th minutes. Any questions or concerns?
I second your right. Have you moved to kind of approve them?
I don't think we have a movement yet, but if you'd like to move,
Okay.
go for
No.
it.
Okay. I mean, I didn't know if we were moving and then discussing or. I have no comments.
We have corrected everything as far as meeting recordings and all that other stuff, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So if there's no questions or corrections to the minutes, could I have a motion to approve? Do we need to do them one at a time or can we do them together?
Together, correct, Gail? You can do them together.
Okay, so I have a motion to approve minutes from January 18th and February 3rd.
Motion.
Second.
Cal? Second, Tom. All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. Next item on the agenda is public comments. We have the opportunity for public comment to be submitted in writing. If you review the minutes, you see a couple of those from the past meeting. We also have an opportunity now for oral comments. This will be limited to 3 minutes. It's not intended to be a dialogue with the committee, and there will not be responses to any questions immediately, but will be followed up after the meeting. And at least I believe everyone who was interested in speaking had to submit to you. So you're gonna call names at this point?
Yes. Our speaker for tonight is Ms. Monica Sheehan.
I don't see her in the Zoom yet.
She's there. We just have to move her as a panelist. Move her to the panelist. Hold on 1 minute.
Hey, Lisa, just FYI, your kind of control screen for that. We can see you're sharing that at the moment.
Ms. Sheehan, whenever you're ready.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful.
you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My comments will focus on the school's fund balance and the finance presentation. According to a Freedom of Information Act disclosure, D200 has only needed to use its fund balance once in the last 6 years to cover a delay in funding. The short-lived delay occurred last year during the pandemic with the receipt of property taxes. The money needed to cover it was on the low end of the fund balance policy, 25%, which the board last reviewed and approved in November 2015. Given this information, the board should consider updating the policy accordingly. D200 stockpiling of our unauthorized tax dollars since 2005 is unwarranted and fiscally irresponsible. Its recent proposal to issue debt certificates to pay for future maintenance projects was disingenuous, seeking to maintain its cash reserve, which keeps D200 unaccountable to taxpayers' spending. Relatedly, the 2013 Finance Advisory Committee had two notable fails. It failed in not recommending that all unauthorized tax dollars be returned to taxpayers. It also failed in recommending that $20 million be set aside for major capital projects, which is not a best practice. They should go before voters in a referendum for funding approval, and to spread out the cost over 20 years so that the voters who will benefit from the project help pay for it. There is no reason to continue to set aside $20 million for capital projects. Anyway, D200 has already spent double that amount on Project 1. Given that D200 has $96 million in its cash reserve and only needs about $22 million, there is no reason for D200 to tax to the max in its 2022 levy as proposed in Agenda Item 6B. Likewise, there is no reason for D200 to levy for new property. Due to economies of scale, these properties pose little, if any, additional expense to the school. D200 should levy for what it needs. The new 5-year projections peg double-digit surpluses through 2026, with the fund balance topping out at $107 million. The finance presentation mistakenly refers to life safety bonds on slide number 24 as debt certificates. D200 has never issued debt certificates. And on slide number 27, or elsewhere, there is no mention of the two most recent referenda, which is surprising as they are relevant to ongoing discussions of a new swimming pool. In 2015, voters successfully petitioned to put D200's non-referendum bonds on the ballot to build an Olympic-sized pool with 23 lanes. And in 2016, voters defeated the D200's referendum to build an 18-lane pool, just 1 lane larger than the proposed Imagine pool. I thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight, and thank you for your time and service to the community.
Thank you, Ms. Sheehan.
Thank you. Ms. Evans, do we have any other public comment?
No, that's the only public comment we have for tonight.
Okay. I think we talked in our initial January meeting about expectations for committee members, and one of those goals was to have our packets go out in advance of the meetings, and members would review them so that we could spend more of our time in conversation rather than in sit and get presentation mode. So thank you to the administration for getting the packets out last week. I put together the School Finance 101 piece that was in that packet, kind of a combination of school finance orientation presentations I've done over the years, plus a fair amount of OPRF current data and history as best as I could compile it. I didn't really want to go through that slide by slide, but I want to open it up to the committee to ask questions or comments or highlight any pieces in that. It kind of just gave a quick overview of how funding works in Illinois, what the key revenue sources are for the district, expenditure uses, talked about fund balance, cash flow, and debt as well. So I just kind of want to throw it out to the committee at this point, if there are any places where you had questions about any of the information in there, or areas that you want to spend a little more time discussing the topic. With the goal, I think, of trying to reserve more of our time for the presentation regarding the financial projections and reviewing those assumptions and things. So. And then Tom also has a piece that he wants to share under this Finance 101 agenda item as well. Did anyone have any questions about some of the funding basics or any of the OPRF current data or history from those slides?
Hey, Steve, I have one. Can you
Sure.
clarify, see what this is? I don't know what slide this is, but it's the cash flow slide.
Yeah.
What were you trying to say by the second bullet point, which is the ISBE financial profile score rates, cash balance?
So
what are you trying to say by that? I think I know, but
yeah,
clarify.
there's 5 different components to the ISB financial profile score. So you get an overall score and you're categorized into recognition, review, early warning, or watch. So the district has been in recognition as long as the history that I had goes back. So that was a couple slides previous to that. But then there's 5 separate components that get scored 1 to 4 within that. One being the fund balance that we've talked about as we've discussed fund balance prior, where any fund balance over a 25% threshold gets you a 4.0, top score in that component. Days cash on hand is also a component of the profile score. It's weighted less than fund balance is. But to get a 4.0 there, you need 180 days cash on hand, so 6 months rather than 3 months. So that was kind of what I was trying to get at with that bullet point.
Okay.
And I think that it was designed that way to address the fact that a lot of districts outside of Cook County get tax dollars in June. And so it's cash in the bank, but it's not recognized revenue because it's for the subsequent fiscal year. And so it's kind of a cash and accrual a difference there. While we're talking the cash flow, I did want to kind of highlight this slide right after that. It's slide 21. I'm not sure which page that works out to in the packet. Let me pull that up real quick. This slide. It's page 52 in the packet. One of the things that we had talked about at the last meeting when we were talking about reserves and the desired level and part of the justification for the district's range as opposed to just a floor for fund balance was the challenges of the second installment of taxes in Cook County. Thank you, Lisa. That's perfect. We had a decade of late tax bills in the 2000s, and it was interesting to compile this because I hadn't really put it all together before and didn't realize how long it had been since the bills had gone out late. So we've had 10 years of on-time tax bills going out in the summer as opposed to the fall, but we had 10 years of late bills before that. And there's been a lot of concern from Cook County districts that this year bills are going to be late. The assessor's office upgraded their software, and so it sounds like that may be pushing everything back. So that I just wanted to kind of highlight that as we were thinking about reserves and continuing to discuss the fund balance levels, that, December 3rd versus, August 1st, 4 months later, that's 4 months of spending down balances from June 30th, much longer spend down than you would normally have if tax bills go out on time. So did want to highlight that page since that was kind of a question or a follow-up item that had come up at the last meeting. Any other questions or comments? Anything that anyone else wanted to highlight? Lisa, could you go back to, let's see, it's page 40 in the packet. Oh, you got it in my slide. So it's slide number 9.
And Steve, I have a question when I'm done. It took me a while to find my mute button, but please proceed and then I have a question.
Sure. Just wanted to show this again. Been in a couple meetings in the last week or two for work where CPI has come up again. I think this is going to be a recurring topic of conversation. I have some questions related to the projections about inflation also, but just wanted to highlight this. We had unprecedentedly high CPI for 2021. That'll be the levy the district adopts at the end of 2022 here. Inflation was at 7%. The tax cap caps the district at 5%. And you can see how much more above, the recent norm that is. So I definitely want to highlight that too. The 10-year average prior to that is under 2%. So as we start thinking about assumptions for inflation in the projection model, I wanted to have this available to you also. And then the next slide, the other piece to the tax cap increase is new property, which is on top of the CPI. So you can kind of see that here. Typically, there's not a lot of new property unless there's a TIF expiring. like we've had a couple times in the last couple decades. But 10 million of new property, which is sort of the typical, only adds less than 0.5% on top of the CPI factor in a typical year. Tom, you want to go ahead and with your comments?
Yeah, you actually led into, I guess, 2 points that tend to be topics of discussion and will show up in other points in data. So one relates to just the TIF discussion you just tipped on, right? And that is where where are we as it relates to TIFs and how do they impact the district's financial position? That's question one. And the other one is the one you covered on the last slide in the PowerPoint, which gets into the referendum history, but
Okay.
a little bit more elaboration on the 2002 referendum. If there's any, just to kind of contextualize it, because it's often talked about and it will be this kind of the backbone of a lot of our data. So those are my 2 things, but
Sure. So what my understanding is that the only TIF that's still active is the Garfield TIF, which is down by the Volvo dealership and the concrete plant. Both the 2 big Oak Park TIFs, Madison Street and downtown, have expired. The River Forest TIF, which was the Whole Foods redevelopment area there, is, you can see on the slide that we had up earlier, expired in 2010. So at this point, I think there's not a lot of TIF activity. Those dollars are on the tax rolls now, and I haven't really heard anything just locally about the Garfield TIF at all. I don't know I don't recall when that expires and if redeveloping the Moore plant area would how that would be impacting with the TIF or the district. I don't know if anybody in the administration knows more about that.
Steve, me and you were both Oak Park residents, but didn't River Forest, I don't know if it ever got approved. They were talking about a North Ave TIF that I don't know if it ever got past the D200 board and all that to be approved. That was like last year or a year before last.
That does ring a bell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't recall where that landed. I don't know if anyone else.
Yeah. I don't follow too closely because I don't live there.
Right.
there was discussion about one, but I don't think it's materialized.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but I don't know that for sure. Yeah.
And as it relates to the others, because there was a lot of discussion when, when we get into the projection model, TIF assumptions are one of the elements that are in there that we would or could anticipate, a change in the taxation in the future when TIFs are retired. And there was a lot of debate on that because we had TIF planned into our long-term plan, and then once it comes due, everyone says, "Oh, you're doing a money grab." So just how it fits into the planning is what I think is important.
Yeah, going forward, I don't think that there's going to be much there. In years past, in older iterations of the committee and the projections, we definitely had, those dollars coming on the tax rolls. You had separate distributions that were coming from the village, surpluses from the TIF that were a separate local resource. All that's kind of washed out now in the projections going forward. But if you're looking at historical data, that definitely would be coming into play.
Yeah. Okay.
We've got the referendum slide up. I'm not sure, Tom, what you wanted to say about the 2002 referendum. I did try to add a bullet point explaining how, to some degree, how it kind of came to pass that the tax cap formula calculated with the education fund rate referendum was complicated under the old laws that were in place at that time. They've subsequently reworked all of that, and referendums work totally differently now for tax cap districts. So that's kind of what created the aftermath and past boards' decisions to levy up to the maximum under that old law and the what they call a referendum phase in. So instead of just a 1-year increase, it kind of recalculates each year over multiple years, and it ended up generating more than 65 cents of new money.
And that was at a time, and I think we'll show data. And I'm trying to understand, I mean, one, we can talk about what the impact was, but, you know, in terms of the what, the why, my understand, you know, there was a lot of rapid EAV growth at the time of the referendum, right?
Yeah, it was kind of a compounding of factors.
Yeah.
Is my recollection. It was a calculation issue with how PTEL and referendum laws didn't really jive from a calculation standpoint, and compounded by the fact of Cook County's triennial reassessment process. So I think there was a big reassessment year that dropped the rate, that then created the opportunity for more of a rate increase, if I remember right.
Yeah. So it was a number of factors all kind of merged together.
Yeah.
Okay.
But in the end, it was each year at the levy time, the board, you know, making a decision on how much to levy too.
Correct.
Yeah. Anyone else from the committee have any questions or anything they wanted to highlight from this? We included the fund balance policy again in the packet just for reference. We've discussed that the past meeting, but I just wanted to have that there to kind of go with the history and the data that I had in the presentation. Didn't necessarily think we needed to revisit it at this point, though. So if there's nothing else for item A there, I'd like Tom to show what he's put together for item letter B, related to some additional kind of longer term historical data for the district. And if from that we want to circle back to anything in the PowerPoint, we can.
Okay, it says if I share, someone else will stop, so.
Lisa stopped, so you should be good.
Okay. And is a Excel chart being shared?
Yes.
Okay. So, and like Steve, there's a lot of data here, and it will not be my intent to go through every bit and piece. Some of this will come up in future discussions, so this is more of a preview. One of the topics that will be on our agenda is looking at the evidence-based funding model. This is a kind of a copy of the evidence-based funding model as it exists. And basically it is a tool that has been, that the state has, that the district has developed and is using, and its intent. So this is not really historical in nature, but it happened to be the first tab. It basically breaks out the student. There are 28 categories that determine what type of resource should be used to achieve 100% adequacy. And this basically is a tool that allows us to look at where we are versus that, both on a macro and a micro basis. The purpose of this is to help us as we move forward determine, do we have our resources where we feel we need them to best support the needs of our students? And, one, if you look at the overall value, and two, if you look at it within the specific buckets of of expenditure. So we'll go into this more as one of our themes during the course of the school year. But I'm just introducing it at this point. The kind of the high level answer to this is that we are a tier 4 school, which means we are on the high end, and we have 138% adequacy at the time this was done. 85% of the schools in the state are below 100, I believe. So there's the haves and the have-nots. We are a well-resourced school, and this kind of just shows the distribution as best we can of our resources. So I'm going to stop with that. And are there any questions on this, recognizing we're going to spend more time on this in a session dedicated to it? Okay, I'll keep moving. So the next slide is I think you did a better job in the PowerPoint of kind of putting nice pictures and graphs. This is numbers, but what it does is it looks at the history of our levy. So this is our levy and the levy dollars, and here is the percent that was levied versus what the CPI. So it kind of shows how we compared to CPI. And really there are, in my mind, as you look at this chart, there are really 3 different things of note to me, or 4, and they're all in color. First is the reference to the 2002 referendum. The net impact were 2 back-to-back sizable increases in the levy on a percentage basis and a dollars basis. So that's what I was questioning a moment ago in terms of all the mechanics, but that's what triggered things. And what that did is it started a process of our dollars above CPI. It really started an increase in our fund balance of growth, where you could see it. There's a change in fund balance column right here. So you can see what the impact of that jolt was back in 2002, 3, 4. That was number 1. The second was, you've heard reference to the CFC, which was a former committee designated because at the time our fund balance was, approaching $125 million, $130 million. And so a task force was put together to say, what do we do about it? And that's when the fund balance policy, when abatement of debt, et cetera. And at that time, there were some, a couple $10 million decreases in the taxation in the levy. So that shows up here. It's not even tens because of the way the timing of things are split on a, fiscal year, calendar year, blah, 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 blah. So, but that was the second big piece. In that case, gave back what the increase was. And the third piece was in 2018, the district applied for and received a, where is it?
Property tax relief grant.
Yeah, well, I can never remember that name. There was a grant that was provided to districts in the school that had high taxation rates. And if the district was able to rebate, then it was able to get some return dollars from the state. And so that showed up here. In each of these cases, there is school regulation or law, and you can talk to it more, that that limits what you can do or could do in reducing taxes without having the risk that what you reduce will become a permanent reduction. So that happened. That's why this was a 2-year and then back up, because of provisions in the tax law that said that there was a look back process, that if you I always
Yeah.
get. the
You
word-
take the highest of the last 3 years. So if you reduce it for 3 years in a row, then you're gonna lose it in perpetuity. If you do a 2-year look back, in 2015, they were able to use the 2012 amount plus CPI to calculate the new limit under the tax cap.
You're a good color person, and you know. So the point is that you look at this data and you see this somewhat yo-yoing, which is really not, I would say, ideal to the taxpayers, but it is based on the way the rules were set up in which you could kind of return money or reduce the levy without handcuffing the district long-term based on its projections. So that's what this whole series of data is, and I'll stop and move on if there are questions. Okay, the next tab is, there's a lot of discussion about capital spend and what does the district spend in capital, and this, just for simplicity, is total capital dollars as reported in our financials, and this is over the same time period. So there's reference to a number, and there's multiple things included in here. Some more computers and other technology stuff, as well as building, et cetera. But there's reference to the old $4 million a year number. And as you look, this is the what it's been, and this is kind of a rolling 5 year. So you see that we've been increasing over this period of time. What our capital spend is. There was a pretty big period, if you look at the early 2000s, where the capital spend was pretty minimal. And that was at the same time we were taking in a lot of money. Okay, questions?
Well, that was, well,
Good.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was also a time when they had issued debt to do projects, but I guess that still would show up here because this is the expense side of it.
Yeah.
Do you know if they have a policy on what's considered a capital spend? Because I kind of, when I see capital, like basically capital spend means any, work policy is like anything that's capitalized. So that's not, is that, the policy at capital spend rules, that anything over 10 or something?
Cindy, can you?
5,000.
5, okay.
I also wanted to confirm, because sometimes maintenance expense gets rolled up in here. Is that reported completely separate? Not a part of this CAPEX?
No, so what's part of this, we actually changed the capital. Capital used to be 500, so everything 500 and over was included in capital. Now we have 5,000 as our is what our capital amount is. So anything over 5,000 is what goes in here. And this would include like buses. You're buying furniture. You have driver's ed cars, and any of the maintenance that's actually going on through the building.
So it
Yes,
does
and
include,
Not cleaning.
okay.
It does include any capitalized maintenance, which it is all in here. The not included in this data. I believe this is without any of the Imagine work. I don't know, Cindy, did some of the Imagine work start in 2020?
It did, but we were putting it to a different account, so that could possibly be some of it
Okay.
in 2020.
Yeah. So that's when.
Yep.
This is all pre-Imagine, at which time there really were no, I would say, significant expansionary capital projects. I mean, the district hadn't done anything major between 1967 and 2020, essentially. Okay, any other questions? Next, this is just a look at resources and just showing what's happened to our building staff over this period of time, in terms of teachers, administration, other total. There's a lot of kind of moving around between buckets, but it's just meant to look at what's happened in resources versus what's happened in other areas. So I'm gonna keep going. So the last picture is one that's more to kind of say, okay, how do these things relate? And I'm going to have a little bit of fun just to start with a clean slate. Okay. So you start with what CPI, this is what CPI did over this period of time. So then the next question is, what happened? I don't know. You guys can pick your weapon. What happened to the value EAV? And that's EAV right there over that same time period. And then there's the levy. And that's what I was somewhat referring to, is that as you hit this period, EAV was going up, which was one of the components that led or contributed to that big upward spike in the levy. You see the levy jumped up, and then it kind of just followed, I would say, more traditional slope. Then we did the reduction for a couple years, and then it jumped back, and then we did the other reduction. So this is just a graphical look of what you do, but in all cases, you're above the CPI value.
Although if you probably had a different base year post referendum, it would look pretty different. Like if you started at 06, I think.
Yeah, if you started at 06, you'd be you'd be in a different picture, correct?
Yeah.
But it shows you the contribution, because, well, let's do that. I'm going to throw in expenses. Did I add them? Where are they? Okay. That's bizarre. I don't know why. So I'm going to do two other ones just to kind of look at things, because a big part to there's your growth in staffing, and I'm going to get my students and okay. One of the big things that drove our increases in the fund, as we were looking at what we're going to be looking at soon, which is the projection model, is in 2013, the projections were that the school would have 4,000 students by the year 2020. And that had a lot of resources tapped into it. That did not pan out. That did not happen. That assumption was revised a couple times. And I believe our current student population is 3,500. So I would say when we talk about the fund, the forward projections and which have material impact, a significant one is how many students we're going to be serving over the course of time. And we've had a lot of noise in that data, and it has impacted, what our forward projection model is. So I'm going to stop and ask if there are questions, but I think it's a good lead in into the projection model, which is where I think we need more time. So. Okay.
How far out do you project student enrollment? How far out do you project?
Yep. Cindy, do you have what the duration is? You're on mute.
Usually it's about 5 to 6 years we project out when we do that, and it's always been a firm outside that we've used.
I know at some points in the past, the three districts did a demographic study together, since you really need to project the two feeder districts enrollment to then know what yours is going to look like. Is that something that's still going on? Or?
Actually, the last time I used the consultant, I asked 90 and 97 if they wanted to use, go along with us and use the same one, so we would have the feed in on it. And at that time, they did not want to.
Yeah, 90 uses a different person.
Yeah.
I think it was back a few years, the numbers were just way off that they were coming up with.
Yeah. So are ours.
Yeah, I mean, they were projecting 4,000, and then every year it kind of came down. So, but that had a lot of resources tied to it. Okay.
Any other questions for Tom? Let's transition to item number 6 then, the financial projections. Cindy or Brian, do you want to do kind of a quick overview of, just walk us through the format of this and hit some key assumptions, and then we'll open it up to questions?
Sure. Brian, you want to start off with it?
And let me just do a quick orientation. If you looked at the PowerPoint, when we look at the revenue pie chart, you got 80% of the district's dollars are coming in property taxes. So that's going to be the driver on the revenue side. And then when you look at the expenses by object, you've got roughly 80% again is in staff costs between salaries and benefits. So again, that's going to really drive the expenditure side to the greatest degree. So with that, why don't we go ahead and walk our way through it.
All right, sure. So the format of the financial projections has, we've kept the same as what's kind of been displayed in recent years in terms of portraying revenues by our major sources in the top section, followed by some of the, what I would call day-to-day type expenditures to keep the school district running. In other words, any major capital project or construction work has been pulled out of that middle section of expenditures because it has a tendency to fluctuate so much from year to year. So it kind of gives a better comparison year over year of the increases or decreases that are happening in regular operations per se. Then the third section shows more detail on some of those particular capital projects, such as Project 1, ongoing 10-year maintenance to the building, as well as life safety work. And then down at the bottom, of course, you get the change in fund balance from year over year based on any surpluses or deficits that are created above. And then the bottom two lines are just some percentages that kind of tie into when we're looking at fund balance type targets in terms of how much fund balance do we have at the end of the year in comparison to total expenditures, and how much fund balance we have in comparison to total revenues. Going across the columns, we've portrayed one previous year's worth of history. All of the data that you see here is presented on a cash basis. So it's not going to tie to our audit report, which is on accrual basis, but all of the internal reporting that the district does in terms of monthly financials and budgets and things of that nature happen on cash basis. So the financial projection follows that same type of accounting. Then, of course, we show the budget for the current fiscal year we're in, and then 5 years worth of projections. And within the 5 years, we have also a projected amount for where we think we're going to end fiscal year 22 as of this point. If we look at the next slide down real quick, there is a chart in here that again kind of ties back to that fund balance policy that the board has. So the bars going up are going to be the district's fund balance. The red line and the green line represent 25% of expenditures. That's the red line, and then the green line would be the high end of that target of 75% of expenditures. So you can see as the projections go from year to year, those lines can move up and down a little bit depending on how the total expenditures come in. We've separated out the fund balance into two different colors, kind of a gold color and blue. So gold is what we're kind of defining as a working fund balance. That's the fund balance prior to the $20 million that was set aside for the purpose of capital work. So you can kind of see where if that 20 million is in fact dedicated towards capital work at some point here in the near future, you can see the gold fund balance where that falls in terms of the 25% and 75% fund balance target range as these projections are currently presented. Getting into the assumptions a little bit, and I imagine this is where we'll have a majority of the discussion. So I'll go through some of the bigger ticket items, and then if we want to talk in more detail on any of them, we can certainly do that. So when building a financial projections, as has been referenced before, there's really three main drivers in terms of what can happen from year to year as we look ahead. One is obviously the property tax levy, with 80% of the district's revenues coming from property taxes. How the district opts to levy in terms of CPI, new construction, and things of that nature, that will drive that total revenue number in future years. The second would be salaries and benefits. Again, the combination of those two items makes up close to 80% of the expenditures. So as things such as the collective bargaining agreements with the various employee unions and other employee contracts are determined, that then drives how expenditures are primarily going to look going forward on in terms of operations. The third item then would be some of the big ticket capital spend that's occurring. So as with project one going on, and then again, ongoing building maintenance type work, these are larger dollar items we're talking about and can have a big impact on where the district falls in terms of fund balance. So all three of the district's kind of in a unique place from a financial projection standpoint right now, in the sense that we just had the CPI for the next levy year come out at 5%, which is significantly higher than what we've seen in the past. How the district decides to levy is going in that 5% CPI year would have a big impact on revenues. The two largest employee unions are currently under negotiations. So salaries and benefits are very much in the air at this point in terms of projecting outwards, because until the contracts are settled, we won't have a firm grasp on where things will land there. And then thirdly, with much of the discussion around capital projects and what projects the district decides to undertake, what year they decide to start some of the projects, and there's been talk of accelerating certain projects to take advantage of supply chain issues and other anticipated inflationary increases in the future. Where those projects get slotted into the projection will provide some flexibility and some better clarification in terms of being able to project in the future. So if we look in a little more detail at some of the assumptions around particularly those three areas, the current financial projection that we're looking at for property taxes assumes that the district will levy for the full CPI in future years. That assumption was made purely on the fact that that was what the district did with the most recent levy. So we took that and just used that as the kind of the baseline going forward. Doesn't mean that will necessarily happen, but for the purposes of this projection, that was the assumption built in. So that would be a 5% CPI taken in the 2022 levy year, and then we assumed CPI would fall in around 2.5% in future years. Along with that, there is an assumption that the collection rate on the tax levy will remain roughly what it's been, between 98 and 99% in the initial year of levy. And the board also recently opted to abate the recapture property tax levy, which was discussed at the last CFC meeting, for those tax appeals that fall within the previous 12 months. So the assumptions around property tax revenues incorporate those various assumptions. Moving down through into the expenditure side, the salaries and benefits. For any collective bargaining agreements that are currently in place and extend beyond this year, we have obviously taken those salaries and benefits and projected them out for as many years are as known. And we do that on an individual employee basis. So within each bargaining agreement, we have a list of all the individuals that fall under that agreement and the increases that are established by those collective bargaining agreements when projecting the employee salaries going out for the foreseeable future. For other unions, such as the faculty and the CPA that are currently under negotiation, the projection model assumes that the increases to salaries that were in effect as of the last year of existence, so in other words, the FY22 salary increases, will continue on an ongoing basis. So everything that was in those agreements in the final year is expected to continue until we get word otherwise that the collective bargaining agreement has been settled. And at that time, we would go back in and update financial projections for the increases that become known at that point. And the last group of employees for the district are what we call non-bargaining employee groups. So this would be administrators, managers, and non-affiliates. These salary increases for those groups of employees are approved on a year-by-year basis by the board. So the assumptions that we have built into the model there are 3% increases in the first 2 years of projections and 2% increases thereafter. On the benefit side, again, where collective bargaining agreements are in place, benefits that exist under those collective bargaining agreements are assumed to continue to be offered at the same rates and in the same capacity going forward. We do have some assumptions that we have to make in regards to health insurance, dental insurance, things of that, items of benefits of that nature. We've had some discussions with our consultants for employee benefits, and based on some of the history we've seen, as well as kind of their work with their actuarial firm, we've built in some the assumption that the increase in insurance premiums will increase by 4% year over year on both for both health insurance and dental insurance. We did see we are projecting a decrease in fiscal year 23 of insurance costs due to some of the savings we're starting to see from the change in insurance plans. that began in calendar year 2022. So that was actually a benefit to the district in the sense that the employee benefit cost has kind of been reset at a new baseline with those changes. So, which is pretty rare to see in financial projection models. Normally, employee benefits is almost an automatic, year over year increase of several percentage points. So, the changes that were made in the for the most recent calendar year there by the district are looking like they're going to provide some cost savings. Other benefits that kind of fall within this category of employee benefits include 403B matches, as well as other retirement costs related to IMRF and TRS. So there are some slight increases year over year built into the assumptions to account for increases in salaries, as well as the rates that are imposed by those two retirement systems on participating districts. Then kind of that third category that I was talking about earlier in terms of big drivers for the financial projections is building maintenance / construction. The way the projections are laid out currently is any projects that we are essentially locked into in terms of contracts or that have already been bid out are outlined in the projections. The finance department, the operations department, the buildings and grounds department all work collaboratively with the construction manager and the architects to kind of put together some year by year projections for how expenses will look on these various projects, especially when they span multiple years, to kind of give us a better idea of which year those expenses are going to fall into. So currently, these projects such as Project 1 and the life safety work are expected to wrap up in fiscal year 24. So that's why you'll see on the spreadsheet with the projections, you'll see costs for those two lines ending in those years, whereas the building maintenance is part of an ongoing process, kind of a rolling 10-year maintenance plan that has been discussed more recently at the board level and internally. So we've lined up some of the costs for the building maintenance line with that 10-year maintenance plan. Now, some of those, we do expect amounts on all of those lines to change in the near future, especially as we're starting to approach budget preparation time for fiscal year 23. This is something that we look at least on an annual basis to kind of see when a project's spanning multiple years, there can be a year where costs may be behind schedule on a particular project or ahead of schedule, depending on the status of the project and other external factors. So each year when we prepare the budget, we like to kind of take a look back to make sure that if we are not on target with where we were the year before on a particular project, we're updating those future year expenses to reflect whatever changes are needed to those amounts. And then the last point I want to make here is currently you do not see a line for Project 2 in the financial projections. As more becomes known related to Project 2, that will start appearing in financial projections. But at this time, until the scope and the timing of any work related to Project 2 becomes better defined, we have excluded it from the financial projections model. So those are kind of the major assumptions for, in particular, the three big drivers related to a district's finances. And then we can certainly discuss any of those or other line items in more detail as the committee would like.
I've got one question for you on the big drivers before we delve into some of the details. at our previous meetings, we reviewed some of the building maintenance schedules and some of the details in that. And I think shortly after our February meeting, I think the facilities committee was meeting to rework all of that. So I just wanted to kind of check and see if the numbers you have here are fairly current and based on those conversations that the facilities committee was having.
They've been updated to the extent of what we knew. I mean, we've dated the projection as of February 28th. So I know stuff has still been kind of evolving over especially the placement in terms of years of where some of those expenses are going to fall. So I do expect it will change within the next few months, but yes, what we knew as of the end of February is reflected here.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Project One is like $60 million right now, right? It was supposed to be 30.
Project One has a price tag of roughly 38 million in total.
38. So all those lines are going to add up to 38 million.
Well, you can't include column 2 and 3 together because one was the budget for this year and one is the projected actual for this year. So
Okay. So
you wouldn't include the 17.9 million, just the 19.2.
Okay, so it's just going to be, so it's going to end up being 38 million? Probably 40, give or take.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any reason why 30% upcharge on a project is pretty high? And I thought that every 10% had to be approved.
Ron?
Okay, so I think I'll jump in unless Ron, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, he's seeing 60 million because he's including the Project One, the health, life, safety, and
No.
Ron, let me jump in because the 60 million question has already been answered. So when Project One was originally put forth as 32.6 million, that was the estimate that was put forward by Perkins and Will at the conclusion of the Imagine process. That was not the result of a specific thorough schematic design. When we first started to work with FGM again, we went to the board and the administration at the time went to the board and they presented the cost estimate of about 36.6 at that point. Since then, there have been a variety of shifts in the cost of Project One based off of how we were going to handle various elements that came to our attention. And the board, for example, the board voted to add into Project One the balcony, which is an extension above the auditorium, right? That wasn't originally part of the Perkins and Will design. There are other changes that were made once we realized that we needed to we could not build on top of the South Cafeteria. In fact, that needed to not just be, a renovation, it needed to be new construction. It was raised. The district administration decided to use some of the tenure maintenance plan to build a basement underneath that. So there are various things that escalated this cost over time, some of which I've illustrated there, but there are others as well. Classrooms were originally removed and then added in, for example. Right now, the reason why there isn't a 100% set cost for Project One, because it's still ongoing, right? We are still renovating some classrooms in what used to be the old tutoring center, and some of that classroom renovation is still slated to be completed not only at the end of this summer, but the following summer as well. Cal, does that speak to that?
Yeah. So I understand upcharges, costs, but at the same time, the architect and your construction manager, whoever you use, if you have one, should have made you aware of this in the first place. That's number one. Number two, you should have told the people about this, because you're going to finish this project. It's going to be north of 40 probably, but there's going to be other stuff that was done, other things that were done that you wanted done to make it a better situation. and you not explaining that to people, they're going to say a $30 million project costs $45 million. And when you try to go and do this pool thing, which isn't a pool thing, but everyone refers to it as a pool thing, it's going to be like the Salem witch hunt at the school. They are not going to vote for it. They're going to try and do all types of referendums. So with this thing that's going to be a higher price, that's fine, but you should explain what's going on. And with the pool issue, every time someone says pool, like in public comment tonight, it was referred to as the pool project. You should immediately explain what the pool entails so that everyone is on the same page, because everyone just thinks you guys are getting money gouged out of you and they don't know what they're getting. I mean, parents don't go into school that much, especially if you don't have kids. You're never in the school. So all you know is what you hear on the street. So that's just my 2 cents. We just got to get out in front of this and let everybody know what's going on and not just say $30 million, okay, it ended up being 42 and that was it. And not mentioning the extra classrooms, not mentioning the balcony, because I mean, in River Forest, 75% of the people don't have kids, seniors. So they're reading pool and they're like, pool, we got a pool for $85 million, but you didn't get a pool for $85 million. You got another gym, you got new locker rooms, you got a facility, you got all kinds of stuff for $85 million. So I'm just saying, we just need to, whoever does this, you just need to explain it better, all these projects, because they're good projects and they're needed. We all have 100-year-old buildings and we got to do it, but you just can't, I mean, just like this Project One. What's Project One? You have, every time you add something, and of course you always add things during a construction project. Everybody doesn't catch everything, but you got to put it out there and let people know that they are getting a value for the price that they're paying. You guys aren't just spending money. That's my point.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Cal.
you. Thank you, Cal. I just, for anybody who's listening, just tune in to
Yeah.
on,
And I have,
excuse me, on March 24th, or we're going to be talking about Project 2 extensively, Cal, to your point. And we have ongoing conversations that we'll be having as well about this.
I mean, it's just like when you did the detracking thing. You and Laura made tours. You came to Village Hall. You came to
Correct.
junior high schools. You explained everything to everybody so that they would feel a lot more secure and be more informed on what's going on. These construction projects, no one knows what's going on.
Yeah, I get it. And I get your point too, because while these things have been talked to some extent at the board table, right?
Right.
That's different than what you're describing right now, Cal. And I appreciate it. It's a good point.
Cindy, did you have something you want to say?
yeah, I do. I don't know. I'm sort of freezing here. The one thing I was going to say, Cal, one of the last things that we did bring to the board was the fact of the remaining 20 classrooms. And we asked if we could finish that would be
Sorry, Cindy, we can't hear you. You're
ending of
cutting out.
Project One. Sorry. I don't know.
You want to try again?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
That sounds better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So Cal, what we did is we did bring forth to the board the remaining 20 classrooms that we still had from Project One, and we asked if we could go ahead and finish those up. And that way, that would be the ending of Project One. But the way we would also use the resources to pay for that would be from the interest that was gained on the 20 million that we've been holding for future capital projects. So I agree, when you're making a change to something does have to come forth, get the board's approval, and then move on with that. And I think there has been some stuff that's been brought. I think it's gotten better with that. And I think that probably on the 24th is, Greg had said that we're going to be bringing forth, talking about with Project 2 and probably some of the Project 1 there too.
Other questions for Brian or Cindy about the projections, either the assumptions or any of the numbers in the document? Lisa, could you pull up just a one-page projection spreadsheet type file, please? Perfect. Yeah, maybe zoom in a little.
So,
I've got a couple things if no one else wants to go.
yeah, I have some questions when you're done, Steve.
Okay. One that surprised me was the replacement taxes that are coming in way, way high this year. I was just curious if the Department of Revenue has shared any information on why that might be. I appreciate the assumptions that we're not assuming it's going to stay at that level going forward. I think that makes sense to step that back down. I was just curious if you've heard any explanations for that.
Yeah, that was one that I started looking for additional information on when I saw kind of where we were trending for this year. They have been relatively quiet in terms of data they've put out in relation to that. I know every year, at some point over the summer usually, or maybe it's the fall, they like to put out an estimate for what they think the future year is going to be.
Right.
And oftentimes we use that when we're looking at, when we're going through the adoption of the budget. But this year, it obviously has come in well above where everyone thought it was going to be. So I have not seen a specific explanation for the reason, other than I can say it's dependent on the income tax returns filed by Illinois corporations and partnerships and
Right.
whatnot. So the income levels on those various tax returns as they've come in have obviously been higher than everyone expected.
Greg, have you heard anything from
Yeah,
your
so I,
work
yeah,
with
so, so I kind of, because
97?
my company is going to owe replacement tax probably in the next couple of years. So it's late in kind of like the 2017 federal tax law changes are finally hitting corporations in Illinois in the current years. And there's also been some changes at like NOL usage allowances and all that stuff at Illinois. So that's probably why you're seeing an increase from corporations, because we're basically paying more to Illinois. In our, like in the 2020, 21, 22, 23, be some years where you're going to see a lot more corporations in Illinois pay a little higher tax. You're going to see a higher replacement tax associated with that.
Thanks. The other question I had on the revenue side, you've got the increase in food service dollars next year with a return to normal food service with the district and with District 97. It didn't seem like there was anywhere where there was a similar increase on the expense side for the added costs of providing those meals. Is that in there and just doesn't jump up as much as you would think?
So where you see the sort of offset to that is in federal revenue. Our local sales, as I would call them, food service sales to students and staff, revenue has been lower during the pandemic because a lot of those meals are being provided fully reimbursed at a higher level by federal grants. So our federal revenue has increased during the last few years based on that, because then we're providing the meals for free to students instead of charging them for it. So it's not necessarily driving an increase in cost, other than we saw an increase in FY22 when students returned to the building and we had to full service the cafeterias and everything.
Okay. So it's not that you're to be selling lots more meals and therefore having more people and more food purchases. It's just shifting where the revenue is coming from. Okay, thank you.
Right, and it does get covered up a little bit by the ESSER grants. So when you're looking at the federal sources revenue line, we're bringing in a good portion of the ESSER grant money in FY22, and then that part starts declining as well and beginning in FY23.
Thank you for speaking to the health insurance increases. That was one that I had flagged. I guess my last real question then kind of relates to the purchase services and supplies lines related to the high inflation that we have now. You've got pretty low percent increases there going forward, but I noticed that this year's budget and projected actuals are quite a bit above last year. So maybe a lot of that inflationary increase is kind of baked into the base that we're starting at before before the increases going forward. But if you could kind of talk to things that are driven a little more by inflation, like transportation services, utility costs, and things like that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so the those exact things you mentioned are some of the areas where we would expect to see some higher increases in terms of year-over-year costs related to purchase services. Some of the other items, particularly supplies, we've tied a little bit more to student enrollment. So, you know, supplies a lot of times varies depending on how many students you have in a classroom. So we've kind of gone up and down slightly from year to year based on enrollment. Now, enrollment projections as we currently have them are expected to remain fairly flat. So there's not a large fluctuation from year to year there. And we did build in a small inflationary amount of 2% at this point until we kind of see what's going to happen with some of our vendors as we start planning, particularly for FY23 budgets.
Thanks, Brian. Tom, you want to go next?
If other committee members are there, I'd yield to them first, and then I have a series of questions. So
Sure. Anyone else want to go?
That's a quick question. And this is more just a timing thing. I don't know if Greg this is probably a question for Greg if he has to, maybe he knows the answer. Is there a timing on you guys think you'll get a new contract for teachers? Because that, like, salaries and benefits are basically going to be the big driver. And right now we're using the last collective bargaining agreement. Is there a timing of when you think maybe you guys will come to an agreement? Will it like be this summer, or because then that would obviously change the projections significantly? Because I don't know where, I don't know. I know you can't talk about it, obviously. But what I'm seeing in other districts that are fighting right now, we could see, an ask for huge increases that might really blow this projection and increase the expenses more, though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball that I can share. As you probably already know, just from your question, we are in negotiations right now.
Yeah.
We're right in the middle of them, so
Okay.
obviously want to get it done sooner than later, but there's no way I could begin to tell you, a month or something like that.
Okay.
Yep.
the contract expires June 30th.
Yeah, I just know the last contract you guys approved, they literally didn't approve. They were it took a whole year after the expiration to approve. So I know I'm concerned that might happen again. We would.
I think I probably speak for everybody in the district when I say we would absolutely love to have that not happen.
Yeah.
Now, which groups, teachers are up? Are there other groups that are also up at the end of this year?
CPA are classified.
That's right.
Okay.
So
So
we have
the two biggest
going.
groups then.
Yep, two
Okay.
biggest groups.
Anyone else with questions?
I was just going to ask in general, when you're building the budget and the forecast, do you, build any kind of, I don't know, saving opportunities, anything that, you might, see where spend, you might be able to optimize scheduling the teachers in a different way, trying to get a better deal on the benefits, any of those kind of savings opportunities that you try to incorporate, or that you're looking at every year to try to keep your arms around the inflation as much as possible?
Yes, yeah, we do. One, for our insurance, we actually have a committee that meets every year when our rates and everything are coming in. And that is one thing that we try to look at to see where can we have a cost savings, especially in the insurance side of it. As far as salaries, those are just, those are due to the contracts, and that we're bound by those. As far as anything that goes with purchase services or supplies, our budget is zero based. So everything is built from zero and just moves up from that. When we send out the spreadsheets to the budget managers to actually build their budgets, they are given a history, but they also have to explain everything, every tab, every dollar that they're spending. So we're also going through that to see where we could save dollars. And then utilities, we're always looking for ways to save on our utilities. So we do some bidding that will happen for the utilities to try to get the best prices. So yes, we absolutely are always looking for a way to save some money. I think two IGAs, we also do the IGAs too. That can sometimes save us some money.
What are the, I'm sorry, what are the IGAs, Cindy?
The IGAs are intergovernmental agreements that we may form with District 90 and 97 to try and get a better deal with the school.
Okay.
Other questions?
I'll jump in then. Steve?
Go for it, Tom.
Yeah, so I have a series of questions related to this whole process. First of all, I kind of have a high level observation, and it's that from my perspective, it seems like we have swung from what used to be a process where on the expenditure side, we were conservative beyond conservative. And I'm looking at this thing over a 10-year period where we were projecting the sky is falling ×3 in terms of conservatism. And now as I look at this, I think my observation is, are we including everything that we need to include? I think the best way to answer that is an ask, which is, we really need to measure and evaluate how well we do with our projections. When we make a projection this year for 5 years out, we need to be able to say, okay, how did we do 5 years out, 4 years out, 3 years out, 2 years out, just to gauge whether we're doing an effective job. Because I can tell you, when you do look back, one of the reasons why one of our challenges is we significantly overestimated expenditures. And the prior estimations look like the plane was going to crash in 2 years. This one looks like we're going to gain some elevation, which as I listen to it, I think we're missing some things. So that's one, which is how do we need to measure against it. And I would even say looking back to see how we've done. My couple observations. One, I think it would be beneficial. I mentioned in prior enrollment and staffing, because staffing is somewhat related to enrollment. If you look at our major growth in expenditures over the last decade, it's been staffing. And so are there any assumptions in here related? I mean, these are all rate-based, but not based on number of bodies. Are there any, I think it was worthwhile to spell out anything specific to both enrollment and to staffing as assumptions, because that's a significant driver of cost. So that's an add. Go ahead.
Can I go back to your first ask?
Yeah.
And ask the question to Cindy. Is there a point in time in years past where you've done an updated projection? So I don't know pick a month, say it's October before the levy. Do we have an October projection for like each of the last 5 years that we could pull together and do the type of analysis that Tom is asking for? Or is it going to be kind of all over the place, different times of year, and maybe a little harder to line them up?
I would say that when we're changing them throughout the year, it'll vary. If you pick a period of time, let's say we pick when we're doing the budget, and we say, here, let's compare it when we first presented the budget, and here's the 5-year projection. I would say that would be probably a good place to start and see if what we've been projecting over the 5 years going back, how accurate have we been, or how close have we been? And obviously there could be some where we go, well, this expense came up that was not in the budget, or, you know, due to COVID, we didn't spend as much as we had assumed we were going to spend, or you could have overspent. We underspent, but, you know, that's the point I'm making, is we can say during this time period, this is what happened. So I think we can go back, but we have to go, I would use a set time. Like I said, from when we start maybe the budget, when we do that and we bring the 5-year projection forward at that time, then I would say, let's use the same period of time every year.
Right, yeah, that was kind of what I was getting at, is that if there's a time of year that you typically updated it, presented it to the board or to the finance committee,
Yep.
that would be the way to try to do it if we can. So
Yeah, and I think
I think that I agree with Tom. I think that would be a very helpful exercise. I've done that in the past when I was consulting with districts, and it's always an interesting exercise, because as soon as you look at it and you see that it's changing quite a bit from year to year, you ask a lot of questions, and it kind of forces you to dive into an understanding of why assumptions changed, why budgets didn't come to pass the way you expected them to, and so on.
Yeah, and I would relate that because the question procedurally is moving forward, and I think this committee is tasked with reviewing these assumptions and reviewing them against something, some historical, what assumptions we've made in the past, and have we hit them or missed them? Just looking at the assumption without any data perspective is somewhat of a challenge. So I'm going to go to my next one, which is, I think related to, just as I look at the data, there are assumptions for, factoring in the spike in inflation, even though it's capped at 5%, but I don't see the corresponding, think that incremental costs expected through inflation. So, and I think that's already been discussed. There were also assumptions in the past, such as pension shift, I believe, was one that was a perpetual element. So I guess, are there assumptions that were in prior models that we've decided to remove because of, for whatever reason? One of them that jumps out, because it was always a topic of discussion, was potential pension shift. Are there any others like that have been removed?
I don't think when we built the budgets, we always talked about the pension shifts. I don't think we really built something in for the pension shifts.
But it was in prior projection models, at least, historically, it's been in models as we've discussed things. And I'm going back, over the last decade. So I'm, before your time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think there were definitely times during the original finance committee,
yes,
when they were running scenarios on how much can we afford to abate, where we had to look at, well, if we abate 10 million for 2 years, and then there's a cost shift or a tax freeze or whatever, is the district still okay or not? I think
Right.
I think it's been looked at as a scenario.
Got it.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. And so I guess the last two things I have is, in terms of process, what's the frequency upon which assumptions are reviewed and changed? Because that's what we need to do here. Because that's, to me, that's the meeting point. Is it once a year that we're going to be doing that? Okay.
Are you asking me, or are you asking Steve?
I'm asking you, Cindy.
Okay, so for us, what we do, Tom, is, we bring this forward here, and then normally as we're working on the budget, we continuously update, because the more no's we have, the more it gets updated. That will also change. That could also possibly change when the levy comes up, depending on what our assumption is and what the actual levy turns out to be, whether we abate, whether we take full, or whether we don't take CPI. So we can actually be changing these projections probably 4 or 5 times a year, because everything is unknown to us. We have to know what's going on. That's why I said use the one time in a year that we're always using. And that would be the first time we do the budget. That would be the first one I would do. Because if we don't make any changes throughout the year and our assumptions are correct, then our budget and everything should be correct and we should line up.
Well, but yeah, this is, again, I don't see, this is a projection model, not a
Right.
budget. So
Right.
I think the key is we've got to be accountable to say we are going to make projections.
Yep.
And then, yes, there needs to be some process by which we can change the assumptions.
Right.
Okay?
Oh, yeah, they're absolutely. We do. Do
Okay,
that
because otherwise it's a perpetually changing thing. My last ask, so I think if we have the information was asked for, which is understanding the, how we projected in the past, the last piece to me that's important to understand is really knowing, as we look at the assumptions, really what the impact is. What are the drivers? And I don't know if there's a way of doing that in a simplified way, but it's the way I like to think, which is we can sit then and say, as an example, pick one of your things. Okay, your levy, a 1% variance in the levy is worth X dollars over a period of time. A blank percent change in the I'm just picking another one of the assumptions. The salaries is worth X, because not all assumptions are equal here. And, as we're trying to, look at and assess, it's important to focus on the ones that drive the big dollars, which, and know how it's better to be right on those and miss the ones that are small than try to get the ones that are small perfect. So if there's some way to kind of relate the assumptions to the model in an index, that would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I would echo that comment, and just to back up to your previous comment, Tom, too, on sort of the frequency of updating it and things like that. We're not going to be looking at the projections at every one of our meetings, but we may be needing to reference them from time to time outside of our typical schedule if a question comes to us to discuss it. And I think we'll want to look at whatever is most current and just understand what has changed between that and the last time we looked at it, so that we can understand, this has become known. We changed this assumption because, and those sorts of things. And as long as we're understanding the incremental changes, I think it's manageable. When it's updating all the time and we don't know why it's changed, it becomes more confusing and we have more questions than answers. But as long as we can enumerate, okay, we last looked at it at the March meeting, it's now August, and here are the things that have changed, and we can understand that, and then we can look at it for what we needed and move on. But I don't want it to become something where we're micromanaging the projections, but just that we're using it as needed, and we're weighing in on the assumptions, once or twice a year.
Mhm.
Anyone else have any comments or questions for the administration on the projections?
Steve, I think that's a great point, because I think the school has more money than it's ever had in the lifetime of the school. And in 10 years, if there's no money in the bank, everyone will be considered a failure and probably fired and murdered and everything else. So we just need to keep an eye on things. I mean, we're going to be building. So, we just have to, like Tom said, what's important, and let's just take care of it.
Yeah, a format for assumptions that I've done in the past that works well is, rather than a more narrative format, of just kind of setting up in an Excel format and just listing the last couple of years of actuals, for be it CPI or increases in insurance or whatever, and then the 5 years of assumptions going forward, and then that final column that Tom's talking to of 1% equals this, or 0.1% equals that, to kind of to give us all a feel for the impact of each of those assumptions. And that allows us to really drill into these are the levers that are really going to move the numbers going forward, and these are ones that we don't need to spend a lot of time thinking about.
Exactly.
So our last agenda item then, if there's no other questions or comments, is on future meetings, kind of talking, I guess, talking about when we would have them, what topics we want to tackle next. I'd like to hear what either the school board members or the administration's thoughts are on in-person meetings going forward. I don't know what you're doing with your regular board meetings at this point, but I was at a District 97 board meeting in person last night, which was kind of fun. So I don't know who wants to take the lead on this conversation. We got a few topics that we had talked about in the past that are bullet pointed here, talking about investments, debt, diving into the comparative data a little more. Kind of want to know, Cindy, from your perspective, where we plug into the budget timeline also. So
we plan to bring you we do actually do three budgets. We do the tentative, we do a preliminary, a tentative, and then the one we bring before the board for the wanting to have it adopted. So we would like to bring the preliminary budget to you in June. That would be right between the cow, and then if we bring it in June, then we could bring it to the board at a regular meeting to show them.
okay.
And then again, then we usually do August and September. So if any changes we make between the preliminary to the tentative, that's what we would bring to you and say, these are the changes. We don't go back through the whole budget again. We just say, here are the changes that we made to our budget since the last time you've seen the budget. And then the same thing again before the adopted, if there's anything that needs to be changed. So that would be the last one. So I would say that's our timeline on it. I don't know when, I would assume June, and probably you would want to see it right before it's adopted.
Do we want to do another meeting between now and June to just for background information on any of these other topics? Anyone have any strong opinions? Are there, I guess maybe the question for the administration is, are there any decision points coming that you need our input on related to investments, debt, comparatives, or anything that's not in that list?
I would say at this point in time, if we did anything, it would probably be the comparatives. I don't know. I don't know if I would look at investments, and rates are going up some right now. So I don't know if we want to do that. It could also be a split if we want to do a split, because it's an hour and a half meeting. I would definitely not do debt service at this point in time, unless you wanted it. The committee wanted an explanation of what school districts do for debt service. I would definitely not move that forward at this time.
Yeah.
But if you want to do a split meeting of, I would say maybe some comparative data and investments, we can have PMA come out, show what our trending history has been. That may help for any questions anybody has. Investments, what we invest in and everything. And then if we have some comparative data, I do a lot of comparative data every day, but that's fine. But do you know what you would like to see as a committee?
Kabrib or Tom, is there anything that the board would like us to weigh in on?
So I think this discussion today was a good backdrop for me, but I think we just need to take action, which is really the review and update of the assumptions, right? I mean, I think today we kind of saw things, but in a more, as you outlined, in a more formal structure where we can leverage the two asks, which is what's been our history of doing it and the review of the assumptions. I would like to see that one get, I'd like to see us connect the dots on that one.
Okay.
The other one we had that was brought up at, again, the last meeting was policy related. And that is, and there's been some things brought forth regarding, debt policy. That's not as pressing in my mind, but it relates to our fund balance and debt policy. It is reviewing and flushing those out. So those are the two in my mind.
Yeah, I would like to do a kind of a projections 2.0 conversation also with reviewing your asks there. We could combine that with an overview of investments and maybe some comparative data also.
Yeah, because I think that the as you said, the projections 2.0 is going to be a good lead in into the budget anyway, right?
Yes, I agree.
So
yeah, because the goal of the budget process should really be to end up where you've been projecting you're going to be for year one of your 5-year projections, and if you're not there, understanding why not. So
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Great.
Steve, you mentioned about in-person meetings too.
Yeah.
To get to that point, I would anticipate, unless something, completely shifts in what's possible for us, all future meetings will be in person.
Great.
Perfect.
Any concluding comments, questions, or concerns before we adjourn? And I guess we'll just kind of look to Lisa to send out something regarding a future meeting date, once the administration and board kind of look at their calendars.
I think, Steve, if I go back to our original, our first meeting of the year, we originally had projected something for the 3rd week of May. So that's for everybody else who's tentatively looking at their calendars, look in that window and we'll get something out soon that confirms that. Okay.
That'd be perfect. Thanks, Greg. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Cal, we'll give that one to Cal. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Kabrib. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
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 Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Be well, be
Good to see
safe.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.